I'm one of, I guess, the AI maximalists, more on that side of the scale than, the deniers on the other side of the scale. But I was pretty clear then that this is going to change the customer interface of how they shop and how they engage with retailers.
Welcome to Unlocking Retail Media, the podcast where we explore the evolving world of retail media from data strategy to monetization and everything in between. This is where we break down how retailers can build smarter, data-driven media networks by aligning with what brands truly need, from scalable ad solutions and meaningful metrics to cross-channel attribution and programmatic strategy. Welcome to Unlocking Retail Media. Today's guest is one of those people who's been working on retail media before it was called retail media. Grant Steadman spent nearly 16 years at dunnhumby, the company behind the data science powering Tesco's Club Card, Kroger's loyalty programs, and retail media networks across 22 countries. He rose to president of North America, then went on to lead customer success at Cooler Screens, helping bring retail media into the physical store. Today, he runs Reciprocal Advisory Ventures, co-founded Astra Works AI, and advises at Bain. Today, we're going to dig into what building retail media actually looked like before it was hot, where retailers still get it wrong, and then we're going to talk a lot about AI and get into how things are generally going to change. Grant, great to have you on.
James, fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I'd love to start. I think we've got this little bit of a trend on the podcast. I think trying to bring people on that have been doing this for a long time, right? Retail media has been really hot in the last 5 years, but dunnhumby was kind of doing this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Give us a little bit about your background and what it was like in those early days.
Yeah, happy to. I wish I could tell you I saw this all coming, and I knew way back then how big the industry would be. I started my career at above the line ad agencies as one of the big Omnicom agencies in London. I had some retail and CPG clients, and was kind of dismayed at the lack of performance measurement or any kind of data on how these big campaigns that we'd invested so much in were performing. So I started moving, below the line. I went into direct marketing, did early days of digital, looking for data, looking for some answers beyond just, how many we'd contacted or total sales. I had Unilever as a customer of mine, a client of mine, and they said that they'd started to work with this company called dunnhumby, who were leveraging the data from what was then the new loyalty program that Tesco had launched. So I found a role there, went out to move out to dunnhumby, and joined right into what they call their comms and media team. That went through various names. It was called the retail media team at one point. It was very exciting. It was groundbreaking. dunnhumby still is a very data centric company. So they had started on that premise of leveraging the data from the loyalty program. I think that first, a little before my time there, but I think it first went to personalization. So using the data to personalize the loyalty experience, the offers, the coupons, etc. And that was run out of dunnhumby. And then they were also monetizing the data more from a merchandising category management perspective. And then it sort of morphed from there. So dunnhumby are leveraging the data to plan and sell and measure personalized offers, and also the data on what's going on in the categories. Tesco obviously had a big shopper marketing, that wasn't new. They had a big shopper marketing area. They had in-store retail media, shopper marketing as it was known as then, and they had magazines. So, I think the conversation, I wasn't in the room with Tesco at that time, but I think the conversation was, why don't we bundle all those things together? These guys are already using data for the offers and for the insights. Why not bundle this all together and have them use data to drive all those things in a kind of holistic way? So that's how it started. It was very exciting, fast moving, different organizations and reporting lines and names for the unit. But that's, so that was kind of late 2000s, 2007, 2008, that kind of time.
And was that before? Because dunnhumby now is a subsidiary of, or part of Tesco. Was that when you started there? Was it already part of Tesco?
It was it was already part owned, and it was becoming a fully owned subsidiary just after I joined, which was, I guess, a signal of how, they had a big partnership with Tesco and how fundamental and strategic Tesco saw this opportunity. So that was a secret that they obviously thought this is something we should fully own and leverage. dunnhumby already had a global business as well, and I think it's 2003. I think they originally started working with Kroger. And some of these areas were big parts of the Kroger work at that time. Others were less so. But so yeah, they bought that out, and then but retail media was one part of what they were doing, and it was an increasing part. But I wouldn't say it was a foregone conclusion that it was going to turn into a huge industry. And I was quite heads down and working on my campaigns and delivering with my customers and delivering for those. And it felt like it was quite a unique capability for dunnhumby. So it wasn't obvious, that you would say, oh, this is something every retailer is going to do globally. There was a couple of guys there who broke off to start up similar retail media businesses with other, I don't know if you know Matt Lee and Joel Hopwood. I worked with them a little bit in my early days at dunnhumby, and I think around 2008, they broke off to do similar retail media, shopper marketing work with other chains there. So that was a clue. The results were always strong. The results, I come from an ad world where, 0.5% or 0.1% was considered a good response rate. So to see how data could really transform the performance. So that was a clue. And it felt like some of these other banners in the UK, I think Alibaba launched digitally its retail media, ad sales division around that same sort of time. But it wasn't really, I guess, until like the early teens, 2010, 12, that I remember reading Amazon had set up Amazon Marketing Services. I think it was called at the time. And there was a couple of ex-dunnhumby folks involved in that somewhere. But so that's when I thought this is going to be really big now. And then, of course, I think Roundel and Kroger, my former colleagues from 8451, launched Kroger Precision Marketing around 2016, 17. And I think by then Amazon was $4 billion in.
Yeah, they were off to the races, and everybody else was catching up. Yeah. And then 8461 or 8451, that was basically dunnhumby at one point, right? That kind of spun over to Kroger.
Yeah, I mean, dunnhumby had a long-term partnership with Kroger from 2003, I think for 12 years that ran. And I think Kroger made, I wasn't close to it at the time. I was still over the pond. I was in the Nordics at that point. But I think Kroger made this decision, it looks like, from the outside to bring that in-house. So they effectively internalized and bought out a large part of what was dunnhumby USA. dunnhumby USA had a few other customers, clients, retailers that it was working with. So I was part of the group that came over in the couple of years after that to help build back up, dunnhumby outside of just purely the Kroger partnership. But yeah, a lot of 8451 folks were former colleagues over here, and took that on in their own way, leveraged some of the same tech and thinking and philosophies, but went in their own direction. Obviously focused on Kroger.
Yeah, it's funny, over in the UK, it's kind of like everybody we talked to worked at dunnhumby at one point.
Yeah.
Where the same way in the US, it's almost like Amazon, right? There's just so many people that came out they did their tour at Amazon and then came out to a retailer or worked somewhere else. dunnhumby has that same effect in the UK, but you kind of seen both sides, right? Because you're in the Nordics, you're in UK, over here in the US. What do you see? What do you think the main differences are? What do you see different about how retail media has kind of evolved in Europe versus over here?
Yeah, very different. Like the scale, I think, for one thing, is very different. But also the context of the markets and how they've evolved, I think, is important and often gets skipped over. I would say US is, more commercially aggressive, more tech forward, more innovative. They, retail media kind of started to some degree with a large retailer marketplace in Amazon, bigger ad budgets, invest more in tech, look to evolve more and quicker. So the retail media sales growth has been faster. It was more digital first and digitally led, given that starting point and the scale of that, versus, the UK had been more, and most of the European markets had started more in-store and shopper marketing, and then digital came in. So kind of different context there. UK and EU, I think more loyalty and insight led, more aligned commercially within the retailer, more joined up from an omni-channel perspective. Generally speaking, there's always exceptions, of course. Tesco was kind of the reference model in the UK, as we talked about with dunnhumby. So I think that sort of stronger foundation and discipline around aligning retail media with what you're doing for customers overall, and what you're doing from a merchandising perspective and how you're trying to grow the category and more omni-channel, but just less scale. And I'm probably less tech innovation. And then you've got smaller European markets like, my friends in Norway, for example, won't mind me saying that, where, things are a bit more pragmatic, and you've got, 2 or 3 large scale retailers. You've got very tight and very often local supplier communities who don't have big global, brand budgets to tap into. So that tends to be even more constrained by scale. Data tends to be more fragmented, less tech, investment and real varying tech capabilities from retail to retail and market to market. They're even less standardization, say in the Nordics compared to the US.
Awesome. I kind of love the history and background of retail media. But I think when we were hanging out at, I think it was NRF earlier this year, and it was really interesting that it looks like you've kind of really shifted into thinking about AI and how AI is affecting retailers and retail media. And I think that was the majority of the conversation then. So I think it's something it's top of mind for everybody. So I'd love to dig into, let's talk about, what's going on in the world of AI when it applies to, retailers and retail media.
Yeah, well, I broke off on my own about three years and change ago now, and first thing I did was go to study AI at Berkeley, which was a good decision and investment, and learned a ton, and pretty quickly saw this was not just another data tool or a tech solution. My perspective, and I'm one of the AI maximalists, more on that side of the scale than the deniers on the other side of the scale. But I was pretty clear then that this is going to change the customer interface of how they shop, and how they engage with retailers. This is going to change also the internal operating systems and model of retailers within their businesses, and therefore it's going to change the economics of retail. So, I think that was my belief then. And that's playing out. I'd say it's still kind of early days. We're probably 2 years into another decade plus wave of tech change. And so, we're not remotely, through it yet or really into it. We're probably only 10-20% of the way into the full value and potential of it. For retail media specifically, I think AI is going to change how audiences are built, how campaigns are planned, how creative is versioned and automated and adapted and tested, how you optimize performance, and from an agentic or AI assisted perspective, how shoppers discover, decide, engage with different products. So there's plenty of hype about it, of course, but there's real change already. And from a planning and targeting and creative versioning perspective, also a little bit from measurement, AI is already, penetrating that and improving that.
Yeah, I think I was like breaking it into, like, if we look at it in a couple different sections, where there's kind of there's the piece you were just talking about, which is kind of how's AI improve like how an RMN operates, right? Whether it's better measurement, better creative, better targeting. But I think first let's go to the other side of it, which I think where you first started talking about, which is like, how do you think, this is like the big question about, agentic commerce and how does it change like buying behavior, right? Like, how do you, do you vision? I feel like the maximalist standpoint is kind of like, hey, like, we're all just going to buy things talking to an agent, right? Like if I'm looking for a new polo shirt, I'm just going to have a conversation. It's going to talk about a couple different brands. I'm going to say, yes, send that to my door. Whereas I say the flip side of that conversation or the argument is, people are still going to shop, right? Like e-commerce is only 25% of commerce, right? Like there's, there's still, people are still going to go feel a shirt and try it on and comparison shop and kind of where do you think we are in, say a couple years, versus say 10 years?
Yeah, I think, it's still nascent today. So I think that it's a time horizon question and it's a relative scale question, right? So I mean, a lot of people said this about e-commerce. Oh, the stores are dead. No one's going to shop the stores. It's still, for grocery, it's still 85, 90% of sales in the store. So it's almost worse than that. And, I was talking to someone about this early today. It's not like agentic commerce or AI assisted commerce is a fully automated shopping experience is going to replace everything. It's a whole nother bunch of things. If you want to meet the customer where they are as a retailer and a brand, if you want to be present where the customer is, you'll need to have physical stores and you'll need to have a website, and that will need to have functionality, a lot of the functionality it has today. And you will need to show up in AI agents as well as having your own integrations in those AI agents. So I think it's not all those things, both and multiple things can be true at the same time. I think we're already seeing it show up in discovery and search, right? The customers are already searching, and it varies on different categories and different demographics of customers and what have you. But generally, there's a very broad audience using AI assistants, and they're already using it for AI, for discovery of different products, for searching for different products. And then some of those go on to the next phase and they, complete a purchase or part of a purchase, or they assemble a basket through an AI platform, and others don't. Others take that list and they go into the store with it, or they go to the retailer website. So it's going to be a fragmented journey. It's not going to go from everyone, shopping in one way to everyone shopping everything through ChatGPT.
It's almost more like mobile, right? Where it was like e-commerce was already a thing, right? And then mobile comes along and now you need to have an app. Users want to be able to buy through the app. And maybe they were buying on the website, and it's another channel, it's another extension of e-commerce where, agentic kind of just feels like another app store you kind of have to be in. And it's just going to be a third way, right? That people are kind of interacting with your e-commerce portal.
Right. And I think that's true. But I think also how customers shop all those channels is changing. So they are becoming used to AI assisted interfaces in all sorts of use cases, but shopping and search and discovery and execution and, the actual transaction is also one of them. But they're getting used to AI helping them in a more intelligent way and helping them get to solutions in a quicker, faster, better way. And, there's a lot of, so I think in all of those channels that customers will be used and expect those kind of AI assisted experiences, whether that's through the whole funnel through to completing and the transaction and the payment or just parts of it is another question, right? There will be that, but where it's not all automated. But you got AI assisted elements of the journey are going to be needed on retailers' on-site websites as well as, on these AI platforms.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask you about that, because I think there's kind of, when we think about the AI shopping experience, there's the new channel, which would be like, okay, you're connecting into ChatGPT. I can now see your products, maybe even transact through ChatGPT to buy a product. That's kind of a whole new channel. And then there's the agents on site, right? Like Amazon's or Target's, and I think we're starting to see that more and more of, okay, yeah, you go to the site, you go to the mobile app, you want to engage with an agentic shopping experience on that retailer.
Right.
And so it's almost like like you said, right? It's an AI enablement of all of those existing channels, but it's also kind of a whole new channel if we're thinking about the ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of new channels there, and then there's also a new way to access a new different kinds of solutions on the existing channels as well, like on the retailers' existing websites. And I think it's a real, there's a lot of sort of talk of, this is a big threat to retail media, and I do think that from a traffic and clicks perspective, there will impact there. The question is, can AI assisted shopping, can retail media support that in a different way? And are there opportunities? There are threats to the current models and the current activations and how that looks. But I really think it's an opportunity actually to have for retail media support, a much more intelligent, helpful conversation with the customer. If you think about a retail media interaction today, if that was a conversation with a customer, it would be customer going ketchup in the bar and the retailer or the brand going back, we have Heinz this size, so this, not to get into the brands, but it's a very basic, simple conversation, which then involves a lot of manual work. From there to a customer explaining their problem, explaining their challenge. I'm having a dinner party. I'm having a picnic for 12 people. 2 are vegans, 2 are this, etc. How do we? And then you building a whole basket and really getting, quicker and better to a better solution for them. I think retail media can help in that journey, but it just looks very different than the static, search and keyword based approach today, for example.
Yeah, and basically it's just like, I mean, going all the way back to tying it back to dunnhumby and data, right? It's just like using that data to inform better promotions and better offers. Right? The user is now just telling you more, right? Like it used to be, you had to know, okay, Grant buys this type of ketchup and he buys it every other week with his club card, and so we're going to target him this way. To where now you might come to the site and say, I'm having a cookout. I'm gonna need a lot of ketchup, right? Like, oh, well, here you go. Here's the 64-ounce ketchup, versus what you might normally buy, right? It's like you're actually getting a lot more intent, like a lot stronger intent signal and information from the customer. But it's up to us as the platforms to actually use that data, as opposed to just see ketchup and say, here's some ketchup.
Right. Yeah. And I think there is a strategic kind of control issue for retailers about, they've owned the customer. They've been the primary interface receiving that transaction data, that loyalty data in the past. And so are they going to maintain that if that goes through ChatGPT and the customer puts a prompt in there? Like, who owns that signal and how is that signal shared? But to your point, those are really rich new signals and all kinds of context about the customers and their lives and what they're looking for, that if those can be harnessed and used really intelligently, I think it can, it can support retail media and just in a very different way. I suppose there's a risk of it more fragmentation, and some people have this type of data signal and don't have that one, and it all gets a bit more patchwork. But I think the retailers need to decide, how are they going to maintain that data ownership and control? Who's going to own the intelligence layer, the data powers, and that is used to drive those things? But I think that will be that's solvable, and I'm positive on it. I'm not saying the growth rate of retail media outside of other channels, if you exclude agentic commerce, I'm not saying that will continue necessarily, but I think as retail media as a whole, if it embraces these new interfaces, these new experiences, it can really help it maintain and grow.
Yeah, I like to say advertising will find a way. It's like Jurassic Park. We will find a way to integrate into any new format, any new application, any interface. We will find a way to get in there.
Well, and it's inevitable because it has to be. I mean, the cost of, if you look at the AI investments on the hardware and the chips and everything, something's got to pay for that, and advertising is a good candidate. So there's a commercial necessity to find a way to do that, and I think we will, and I think it'd be good. I think it'd be good for everyone, but it's going to be change, and some people don't like that, and some people get very vested in their current economic interests and operating model and don't want to see around that, and so they kind of deny the changes coming. But I think it may be a couple more years than some people predict. I've seen a lot of predictions for sort of 2030. It's going to be this much of 30% of all e-commerce is going to be through AI agents, and it all depends on how you define that. I'm not sure it's going to be quite that aggressive in the growth, but I do think it's coming and inevitable.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, if you're 30% of all if 30% of all e-commerce is agentic, you're still talking about 10% of all commerce. And so thinking about that, if you're a retailer, what are, they're hearing all of these things. They've got, got ChatGPT over here. You've got, hey, you guys should have your own agent. Hey, you guys should be thinking about how your LLMs are looking at your catalog. Like, where, if you're talking to a retailer, like how do you suggest they attack this opportunity?
Well, I think there's certain, we talk about, and this is some of the work we do at Astra Works, helping retailers on their AI transformations. We talk about 4 levels around the sort of strategy, your activations, your change management, and your enablers. And, the enablers being kind of the data and the models and the governance and some, kind of basic training and what have you. So we talk about those different levels. I would say, what is least, and a lot of that stuff, oh yes, I know we need this, and they're aware of that. What is most understood, I think, most misunderstood and skipped over is, people tend to dive into the tech, and it's like, okay, this is a tech challenge and we need to approach this like we did digital transformation, and we need some new tech, and we need some new data. And that's all true and part of it. But that's actually, for me, and what we've seen, is an easier solve than the leadership and the organizational challenge that it represents. It's really an operating challenge to embed these things, this AI, and make it work across multiple use cases. And retail media is one area, but it's really an operational and organizational challenge to embed it and change how people work, to embrace it and get the most out of it. It's not just an automated productivity challenge. It's, that's one kind of use case, but that's too narrow. The biggest change is that AI can change how decisions are made. It changes the jobs people do. So we do a lot of work on, the change management around what is the workflow today in this particular process or function. How is AI going to change that? And then what does the tomorrow's process look like? And sometimes, there's different types of AI that have different impacts on that. Sometimes it's a very similar process, just much faster, and speed is a big, advantage of AI. Other times you're cutting across multiple functions and teams, that you're changing decision rights, you're changing who does what. It's a big kind of racy adaptation piece of work, and stakeholders need managing. So that, I think, is often overlooked and underestimated. And then in those cases, the retailers run into pilots, but then they have trouble scaling them because, doing a one-off kind of side desk exercise is one thing, but making that the default way of working cutting across functions is a much bigger change process. So that's often, overlooked, I would say.
Yeah. And how do I know, I think we're recording this a little bit before it comes out, and I promise we'll hold it until you release. I know you have a report coming out soon. You want to talk a little bit about the report and kind of maybe some of the highlights so people can go download it and check it out after listening.
Yeah, thank you, James. I'll be pleased to. I mentioned Astra Works and that the company and what we're doing there on AI transformation. So we are publishing the what we believe is the first study in retail on how retailers are deploying AI assisted or agentic commerce capabilities for their customers. So it's called the Agentic Commerce Capability Index. It comes out on May 21st. So by the time this is out, I think people will be able to access it. And it's focused on 24 of the leading grocery retailers, and we're starting in that sector. So it's still in the field. We've been doing a lot of different rounds of research. It's been challenging because these capabilities are evolving every week. And what keeps me awake at night is a big new launch from a retailer on an agentic commerce capability in the middle of our final field study window. But effectively, it's trying to say, what do retailers deliver for their customers today in terms of AI assistance, both, and there's different dimensions to it, both on-site, so on their own digital properties. Is there an AI assistant on their website or their app, and what functionality does that have? And we drill right down and run different prompts and scenarios to kind of understand how that works. Similarly, offsite, which retailers have integrations with ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini, and what do those look like, and what do they look like if through a plugin or an integration versus just an open organic chat experience? So drilling into that. We're also looking at commerce media and how that is media being tested and retail media being tested on those AI interfaces, and very early days, and that's really hard to capture any live examples because of the way it's been tested, but looking at which retailers are embracing that and to what extent, and how that's working. And also looking at some of the data elements of what signals can we get from how these experiences work, about how they're investing from a data and technology perspective in supporting these foundations. So that's the study, and then basically the findings show that there's a handful. And I won't go too much into it in case things change at the last minute. But as you can imagine, the likes of Amazon and Walmart leading the way with their capabilities. Amazon particularly on its own properties and what it's doing through Rufus, and Walmart, of course, through Sparky similarly, but also on the AI platforms. They're really leading the way at the moment with a lot of functionality, and that's reflective of their overall strategy. You've then got a follower group, and the Kroger company and Albertsons and a few others are in that space where they're doing a few things. They seem to be testing. They don't yet seem to be at full scale or going all in with any one AI platform. And then you've got a long tail of folks who are maybe doing one or two things And then you've got a couple of retailers who have made, folks like Trader Joe's and Winco and typically value oriented chains who just aren't playing in the space really at all and blocking it and, not being picked up there, which is, a strategic choice they're making.
It's a choice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a choice. We'll see how long it lasts. But so that's how it looks today. And our idea is to, we will refresh this on a regular basis and keep this research going and see which retailers are evolving and how these different elements of the experience becomes more important over time.
And I think this is interesting. If let's say you're a grocer kind of further down the list, like maybe you really haven't done a lot yet. Where would you, I guess maybe it's, depends on a lot of questions, but thinking about like, is it leaning into, how am I exposed in the LLMs, or is it trying to keep that consumer on your site, right? To keep them in your own agentic, in your version of Sparky or Rufus, right? Like it's kind of like if I'm a retailer, like how do you think about placing that bet?
If I'm a retailer, it's a strategic choice. I think it's got to reflect your overall strategy and your overall positioning. Like I said, some of the price-driven, store-heavy, they've been slow on e-commerce and they're not really invested in that as a decision. And I think it's similar here. So it's got to reflect your overall brand and value proposition. But my belief is if you're going to meet the customers where they are shopping already on these AI platforms, looking for products. So you need to show up there. And if they're going to go to your website and they're going to, go to the search bar, and pretty soon they'll expect that if they put in a long prompt telling you all about their summer barbecues and all that you give more of a response than just we sell ketchup, right?
Yeah.
So you need to have those I believe you will need to have those capabilities. So some will not do that, some at all, ever. Some will be slow to it. Others are already kind of going down that road. So this is trying to benchmark like how a retailer's thinking about that. What are they offering? We'll track how that kind of evolves over time. But I think you have to get there. And that's what I'm saying. I think it's not just the platforms themselves. It's the way customers shop is going to change. They will expect to get more intelligence back and more solutions back and less just manual product by product, keyword by keyword type thing. So I think you have to meet them there. But some retailers won't, and some of them will still do really well because they're great value. They've got great locations. You don't have to compete on, and some of the smaller chains can't afford to compete. The smaller regional supermarkets, a lot of them work with Instacart. Instacart have some fantastic AI-assisted capabilities, and these guys will benefit from that being part of that ecosystem.
Right.
I would also want to show up as my own brand as a retailer in those platforms, and not just be reliant on an Instacart integration. I would build a plugin and an integration as Target and Walmart and other banners have. So when you go to ChatGPT, you have a sort of branded environment that fully reflects you as a retailer, that your customers can find you there. But for some of the smaller folks, it's going to be a bandwidth discussion. They can't do everything.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting opportunity though. If you're a brand, if you're a retailer who kind of was late to e-commerce and didn't build up a big, e-commerce operation, it's kind of an interesting opportunity to say, like, if you really went in on it, you could kind of just, leapfrog a lot of people who did, right? By really, really jumping in on this and saying, hey, we're not going to go, maybe they never built a really powerful website and search engine. And, they're like, hey, we're just going to start AI native, as opposed to kind of going through the last 20 years that everybody else went through.
Exactly. And I think, AI, the promise of AI should be a leveler of the playing field for smaller chains who want to make that strategic decision that they can do that leapfrog. You don't need hundreds of analysts, hundreds of data scientists. You don't need big infrastructure that only the largest national chains have had. You don't need that. You can if you leverage AI properly, you can build these things, but it relies on you, going back to the change management and organizational challenge, it relies on you being more agile and more flexible and adjusting how you work. But if you can do that and you can leverage AI, then I think there's a real leapfrog opportunity there. But you've got to be set up operationally to deliver on that. And that's tough for a lot of retailers with all the day-to-day, operational challenges and work to do.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Grant. It's been great to have you on. I think this has been a great conversation. I hope we'll put a link to the report where people can find it, kind of in the show notes and the LinkedIn post. But I'm sure we'll probably have you back in the future, where probably in 6 months' time we'll have had 3 years of AI time. So it'll be a lot for us to cover again.
I'd love to come back, and it's always a pleasure talking to you, James. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Retail Media. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share this show with your network. We'll be back soon with more insights to help you navigate the future of retail media. See you next time.